Greetings, viewers, and welcome back to Just Short of Fantastic. Welcome to September. Because it is September, in honor of September 30th being in Canada, the day for National Truth and Reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples, I will be reviewing an Indigenous novel. This novel does take place in the United States, and it is by a United States Chippewa author. However, Indigenous peoples can move freely between the different borders of the countries. They don't always recognize the countries of Canada and the United States in relation to their land rights. So I feel that even though it takes place in the US, it still has a lot of impact, a lot of themes and messages that are cross-border between what tribes experience in the United States and in Canada. So, without further ado, let's start. The book I'm reviewing is called The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich, and it is a historical fiction novel centered around the Turtle Band of Chippewas' fight against government termination in the 1950s in the United States. As I mentioned before, Louise Erdrich is United States based. She is part of the Turtle Band of Chippewa, and she lives in Minnesota, and that is actually how I got this book. I picked it up when I was in Minneapolis last summer. This is actually the last book from that haul that I am reading, and wow, did I save the best for last, because it's the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, and she has crafted an absolute epic. It is phenomenal. It's intimate in its depiction of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewas' struggle for survival against a government intent on erasing their existence, yet it is grand in its scope of human history and that eternal battle for land and resources. I was absolutely blown away while reading. I found myself fully immersed. I fell in love with the characters. My heart was broken again and again, but there was also a joy here as well. There was a soaring spiritual joy that I felt as I was reading. It was intense and highly enjoyable. I am so glad that Erdrich has published over 16 novels. She's published poetry and children's books, and a fair few of her novels are available at my local library, which I am delighted because I will definitely be reading more of her work. It is so good. Thomas is the titular night watchman at the local jewel-bearing plant, and he is also a member of the tribal council for the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. He is loosely based on Erdrich's own grandfather, who was heavily involved in the struggle against the termination bill. So in the book, Thomas discovers that Senator Arthur V. Watkins, who is a real historical figure, has put forth a bill to terminate the Indian tribes of the United States and give their land away. So Thomas discovers this, springs into action to resist the bill and the termination of his people and other tribes. Meanwhile, Patrice, who is a totally fictional character, is a young woman who works at the same jewel-bearing plant, and she is consumed by the mystery of her older sister's disappearance to the city Minneapolis as part of a work program to get young people off the reservation and into the cities. She has disappeared and completely fallen out of contact. So her younger sister Patrice sets out to find her, but quickly gets into trouble herself. And these narratives sort of intertwine into each other and then resolve at the end. The standout character for me was Millie, who is a young woman whose father is Chippewa, but she was educated in Catholic schools, and when the book starts, she's studying at university, and she is invited to come back to the reservation to assist the Turtle Mountain Band in their fight against government termination. So Millie enters the story rather late, but she is a force. It is put forth pretty early and clearly that she's sexually attracted to women, and there are hints that she might be genderqueer, although it is the 1950s, so she doesn't have any language for that. Also, being raised in Catholic schools would also repress all of that. But I really resonated with her for that reason, but also because of her assimilation into white society. And that really struck me because I am a person with Mohawk heritage, but you wouldn't know it to look at me. And there's a disconnect in my family about that Mohawk heritage, so I have no knowledge of it. There are no physical indications of it in my outward appearance. As a result, I really felt for Millie. I really resonated with her question of her identity and her place in the world, and I appreciated her inclusion in the greater story and her conflicting nature and her questions about herself and her place in the world. And the standout event for me was a quick memory of Thomas. When he was younger, he and a friend would go train hopping down to the south of the United States during the Depression, looking to pick up work in the orchards. And one time while they were doing this, they were rounded up with the Mexican workers, and the security police thought that they were Mexican, even though they insisted that they were Indian, they were US citizens. They were forced back over the border into Mexico. I found out while reading this book that hundreds of these raids took place during the Depression, and thousands of Mexican immigrants, many of them American citizens, were forced back to Mexico. I don't know why I thought that was shocking, given that a even more recent administration was keeping immigrant children in cages, and we really have not come very far in our treatment of others. But you can't do better if you don't know what you've done wrong. We need more authors, more voices telling these stories, giving us the truth, so that we make sure that that never happens again. The book opens with a brief introduction by Erdrich, explaining the historical context of the story and acknowledging how fiction intersects with fact, including which characters were loosely based on real people, which characters were total fictions, and which characters were real historical figures. Then the novel proceeds to unfold through titled chapters told in the third person limited that weave and twist around each other, more or less in a linear way, moving among the many characters involved in the narrative, but mostly concerned with the two main protagonists, Thomas and Patrice. There is a very amusing chapter from the perspective of a pair of horses. Chapters range from multiple pages to a half a page in length, which allows for really excellent pacing. It was such a page turner. I got through it in a really good time. The action and the events unfold at a good clip as the emotional dramas deepen. The novel ends with a one-page epilogue from Erdrich to wrap up the historical events, and that is followed by an afterword and acknowledgements. Dialogue in the story is authentic. The characters use a lot of native words and phrases, often from different native languages, as they can communicate with different people based on what their backgrounds are. And the prose is so striking at times that I had to just pause and reread some paragraphs to bask in their beauty. Erdrich is a real master of the craft, and like I said, I cannot wait to read more of her writing. This book was published in 2020, and I think it should be on mandatory school reading lists. Like Millie, my understanding of Indians and their history is distant and remote and heavily influenced by European morals and history. And to read about this government termination from the Indian perspective was something undreamt of in the 1990s. Something that struck me really early on is when Thomas first discovers the proposed bill. He remarks that the government sees Indians as a problem to be solved. And this held ominous overtones of Hitler's final solution towards the Jewish people of Europe. Thomas immediately saw that the fight was to remain a problem, to not be solved. I think that can be said of any minority group struggling for their survival and existence in a capitalist, patriarchal society that is trying to erase their existence. We should be protesting and be doing our best to not be solved. We are not problems. We all have a responsibility, and the first step to that is educating ourselves. We need to hear the stories. We need to hear the history. Reading books like this, finding Indigenous scholars, going to talks, reading articles or nonfiction experiences, memoirs, so that you know the truth from another perspective. And then once we know the truth, we can work towards a peaceful reconciliation. This book is absolutely recommended for Indigenous historical fiction lovers. It is recommended for fans of Indigenous narratives who are looking to deepen their own knowledge of First Nations history and experiences of resisting government assimilation. And it is absolutely 100% recommended for book clubs. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been a book review of The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. Highly recommend. That is all from me until October, the best month of the year. Until then, stay just short of fantastic.